Hey guys, I have some great news. I got a pole barn. I can work on this motorhome all winter long out of the elements on a flat, level concrete pad. This is going to be fantastic for the motorhome, and I should be able to make even better content for you guys. So I'm really, really happy, really excited about this. Unfortunately, it means I have to move and relocate from the Pacific Northwest all the way to the Midwest, basically outside of St. Louis, because that was the only place in the United States where I could find reasonably priced property during the pandemic and all this craziness that the world is going through. So I've been trying to get a house now with a garage barn thing that the motorhome could fit inside of for almost a year. I want to say that we've offered on 3 or 4 houses. We've actually made offers. We won an offer on a house outside of Reno, but that turned out to be bad, so we had to back out of that offer. And the other offers we didn't even win. So this St. Louis house is close to some family that we have in the Midwest, so it should work out well for us. And I'm sorry to go. I know that a lot of you guys are watching these videos from right here in Vancouver even, and a lot of us aficionados or people who really love these motorhomes live in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm sorry to be leaving the area, but that's the way that the cookie crumbles, as they say. So yeah, well, anyway, I got to drive this thing over the Rocky Mountains, and that is kind of intimidating because it's in no shape at the moment to be driving over the Rockies. I'm not going to touch the engine. I'm a little nervous about how well that carburetor is going to perform at elevation as I drive up and over the Rocky Mountains, but I think I can get the driveline components done. I'm sure I can get those done and fully functional by the time 3 weeks expires, which is when we're going to be out of here. So I've got to pack all of my stuff, pack all of the garage, and get this motorhome ready to go all in a month. So there's no time to delay. Let's get right into it, finishing up the front end, 1-ton front end installation.
You guys want to see something neat? I got the step installed. Now, back in episode 6, you'll remember I didn't want to install the step because these two legs, this one over there and this one here, were not both touching the frame under there. And I had assumed it was because of frame sag. Remember, here inside the motorhome, I put a big straight edge across this seam right here, this seam. And there was like maybe, I don't know, an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch of sag across that member. Up there where the steps up into the like cab or the like driver's area go, that's actually perfectly flat because it's effectively strengthened by that 90-degree step. And back here at this seam, there's not really any sag either because this sits right here where the wheel wells are. So this is not nearly as long. So it's just this singular member that I have experiencing that bow, that warp. And I had assumed that it was enough to affect this step. And it is still a problem that should be addressed, especially in the early models, the early like 1974, 75 maybe. I don't know when exactly they fixed it, but at some point they started to make these a little bit stronger somehow. Yeah, so the 78 is a little better as far as the frame sag. But anyway, back to the step, it works. Why does it work now and it wouldn't work before? The answer is from the last video. You guys remember this bent bolt? This is the bolt that adjusts the tension on the suspension. So the torsion bar spring that holds the whole motorhome up, that's this bar right back here. That's a spring, and it's adjusted at that far end with this. Well, because this bolt was bent, the previous owner or the owner before that was only ever able to adjust this much preload on that. Whereas the other side, the driver's side, the bolt was down to like here. So this side was less tension, which means that the whole frame was racked. So sitting here in my driveway, this portion of the frame was pushed downward because this suspension was effectively lowered. And now that I have the front end sitting up on those 2 jack stands perfectly level, and the back is level as well, the frame lines up perfectly with the step. I got the final shipment from Manny, which includes 2 of these bolts, the dome-tipped suspension adjusting bolts to replace this bent one, as well as, the other one's a little worn. Now, the important thing about this is that these are fully coated in anti-seize. So you saw me coated in red Loctite previously. Look, there's a bunch of red Loctite, but this is wrong. You don't want to do this. And the other thing Manny sent me is this energy suspension bushing kit for the sway bar. These are made out of polyurethane, so it's not this like butyl rubber. I don't even know what kind of crappy rubber came stock. And you know, this Moog stuff that I got is also just that lower quality rubber. So polyurethane is going to be a lot better. But polyurethane tends to squeak. So look at that. There's some like grease channels down inside. They're really cool, as well as a Zerk fitting here so that you can just squirt grease into the channels after it's all assembled. This is nice. And the sway bar rod ends here also in polyurethane. All right, well, you can see I've got the torsion bar here, wire brushed and sanded, ready for a quick acetone wipe with a rag, and then some rust converting, rust encapsulating paint. Anyone who's ever done mechanic work knows how this goes. One little issue can sometimes take all of the time. Now, here's the torsion bar spring, and it's going into what we're calling the pork chop, and that's this thing right here that the bolt pushes against, and that adjusts the preload on the front ride height. So this is the bolt that I removed from this exact spot. How on earth did that get bent? So I was thinking they must have hit something while driving down the road. For some reason, getting this thing screwed in is impossible. There's just an insane amount of resistance. I did not ever inspect up inside of there when I installed the pork chop, but I did get free sort of movement when it was not attached at that end with the lower A-arm. So yeah, it's kind of a mystery. This is a crazy one. For context, the other side there went in without a problem. And I really don't want to bend the new one, so I'm using my suspension pre-adjusting tool here, and I'm using my torque wrench at 150 foot-pounds. So I haven't gotten it to click yet, but that's how much I'm having to put on this to get this thing to spin up into place there. It's crazy. All right, I figured it out. What it required was to put a dab of grease on this point here or on the bolt point right there. So there was just a lot of friction against the metal on this side for some reason. Maybe it's pitted and rusted. I don't know. But with some grease, it actually took a reasonable amount of force, and I didn't even need the suspension tool here. It's time to start torquing down all of the nuts and bolts that I touched during the installation of this 1-ton front end, starting with the hub nut here. And that turns out to be a 36 millimeter nut. And unfortunately, I ordered the wrong size socket. 1 3/8 ends up being ever so slightly too small. So you can see what I've done is I've gone in and ground the sides down with my Dremel tool. And now it's a nice snug fit over those nuts, and I can torque those down to 150 foot-pounds. I've assembled this list of torque values from a couple of different sources, kind of guesstimating on what I think should be right. So don't quote me on this and use your own values and whatnot, but I think these are going to be good numbers. Anyway, these numbers at the top here are the ones that I need to torque down to final spec right now. And then you have what I'm calling the turnbuckle nuts and the upper A-arm bushing nuts. These do not get torqued to full spec until the alignment is right. Somebody called me to task in the comments section for using my torque wrench here as a breaker bar. And usually when I do that, it's really, you're not supposed to do it. So I'll tighten this down as torqued as it can possibly get. Just really, really way up there. So like, what is this going to be, 150 foot-pounds of torque? If it goes click while I'm using this as a breaker bar, I stop using it. I go find some other solution. So that alone should ensure that the torque wrench here is not going to suffer or get thrown out of calibration. I also have this old style of torque wrench, which you can't really throw out of calibration without it being very obvious because the wrench would be bent along the shaft here. And yeah, these are pretty awesome. It's a pretty simple thing. The smaller bar here stays straight, while the larger bar bends, and it's just a big spring that bends at a known rate. So that's what the gauge shows you, how many foot-pounds it takes to bend the major bar here a certain number of degrees. So by putting a bolt and a nut in between these two torque wrenches, I can use the old school torque wrench to calibrate the new one. According to the dial, we should get the click at 30 pounds. So let's look at this. Yep. Pretty good. I've got one of these lug nuts loosened and I'm torquing it down here to 40 foot-pounds so that I can get a feel what 40 foot-pounds is like using the shorter wrench here. See, the shorter wrench here is ever so slightly narrower in profile, which means that I can just squeeze it in there between the boot and the nut here on the upper ball. There isn't any room to spare. So, using my finely calibrated hand here, I'm going to pull 40 pounds of force and then go a little bit further to get the cotter pin. These star-headed bolts where the inner CV joint meets the differential, basically. These are the last things that I need to torque down, and they need to be torqued to 75 foot-pounds, which is pretty substantial. So I've got the front wheels driven up onto the ramps, which hopefully will give me enough clearance for my long-handled torque wrench. But first, I'm going to need to remove the cross members here, the bent ones that I need to straighten anyway. So when I remove those, I should be able to get my torque wrench in there and be able to get better range of motion, hopefully full range of motion. We'll see. Yep, that provides the clearance that I need, but I can only get to those 3 bolts. So hopefully there's enough room left on the ramp, and when I back the motorhome up to the end of the ramp, I'll be able to get to the other 3 bolts. I'm putting masking tape on the bolts that I've already torqued to spec, and that one right there, I'm reasonably certain that I stripped it. The other ones are clicking at 75 foot-pounds. This one just kept spinning. It suddenly got easier. Yep, see those threads are all filled up with the metal from the flange. I do not have the time to disassemble this whole final drive and take this off and all that work to fill that full of weld and then re-drill and re-tap it. So it's basically as much work to fix this one hole as what I've done to get this whole front end kit already installed. Anyone who's ever done auto mechanics knows the sinking, horrible feeling you get when a bolt suddenly becomes easier to spin at the bottom of its motion. This sucks. And there's the rest of the threads. I'm over here torquing these bolts down to their spec, and look at those threads. There's partial threads, like a half hole worth of threads on the conical portion of the flange here. So if I had a longer bolt over there, I could maybe get some more torque on that stripped out bolt because there's still some threads left. The other thing I'm thinking looking at this is that the red Loctite, which Manny told me to use, could potentially be lubricating. It's meant to be a glue. Once it hardens and dries out, it keeps the bolt from backing back off. But while you're installing it, it's a lubricant, which could be throwing off the torque values. So I could have over-torqued that in effect because the Loctite acted as a lubricant. Red Loctite wasn't even a thing in 1973 when they came up with the torque spec here. So they expected this to be metal on metal and that friction coefficient. And it gets even more complicated because you see for this bolt here, the pinch that locks the stainless steel clamp that keeps the boot here all over the CV joint, that lines up with the bolt. So as I was torquing this one down, the extension here was pressing on that, which caused it to pop loose. So I don't have the crimper tool to put this on. I guess I'm going to replace this with a zip tie. That sucks. Man, I've had more problems with these flange bolts than anything else in the install. Yeah, it's the Loctite. I did not torque these to spec on the first pass. I got them close and they felt like they were not getting any more difficult to move. So I let them sit for a minute, then I put my torque wrench on them and they didn't budge an inch and my torque wrench clicked. So I've got this Tecton clipper tool. I think this is, I don't know, like a horseshoe nail removal tool. I don't know what you call this thing. At any rate, I think I can use it to crimp this together. Yeah, well, that's a little misshapen, but it's on there, so I think that's at least one catastrophe averted. You know, laying under here looking at this with all this extra headroom, I noticed this steering damper rod is all corroded. It's like pitted with rust, which means that the seal keeping the fluid in here has probably been sandpapered away by all this corrosion. So I think I should replace that before driving across the country. This is one of the stock flange bolts, not the replacements. And even though it's been well used and it's 43 years old, I'm going to use it because of the extra length. If you guys will recall, this is slightly longer than the bolts which are currently in there. So I will be able to grab at least a couple of threads. I should be able to get this up to, I don't know, 40 or 50 foot-pounds. But the socket size is one size larger, so the next mechanic who touches this, if it's not me, is going to think that I'm an idiot and wonder why I used one bolt that was different from the rest and why he has to switch socket sizes. But that's the way it goes. And of course, this stripped bolt lines up with the crimp on the CV boot. Of course, Manny, you got to put these things in between bolt heads. Well, the good news is that it definitely protrudes farther and grabs those threads, but the bad news is it looks like it's about to collide with the flange here. Well, you can see that chunk of wood that I stuck in there just to see how much clearance I got, and it seems like there's about 1 millimeter of clearance right down here. I could grind it a little bit shorter, but I need every one of those threads to grab the conical section down there, so it clears. I'm gonna leave it like this. Let's get these bent cross supports straightened out. I've got this old railroad plate here. You can see it was real rusty, so they were discarding it on the side of the railway. I picked it up years ago. My bench vise is not strong enough to stick this in there and get that kink out of it. I was hopeful that the big sledgehammer would be able to take out these bends. Well, you can see my technique here, sticking the bar into the trailer receiver, and I'm able to get some good leverage to straighten it out. And that allowed me to get this one here into what I can assume is pretty close to the stock shape. It's got a slight bow to it in order to clear the, the torsion spring, that rod. So I think that this is the shape I need to get that one into now. This does seem to work on both sides of the motorhome. So if I get that one to the same shape, then it should work. Say hi, buddy.
Hi.
So if I can get that one into the same shape as this one, then I should be golden. I tested this one out and it works on both sides. Why don't you go throw it in the trash in the house? Oh, so I should take care of it?
Yeah. Look at the stripes on the side of the wall.
Oh, look at that. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
All right, well, these are pretty much into shape. I mean, they're not perfect, but they're pretty good. And I had to get really creative to get the leverage on these to shape them up. I even had my wife run this one over with the Land Cruiser to get the arch out of it. It had a really severe bow to it. And, well, that solved the problem. So I can get these installed and they'll function as good as ever.
Okay, now what's that thing hanging down?
I don't see it. What are you talking about?
That.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I should probably figure that out and get that fixed.
Yeah.
Also, this is quite a dent in this cross member. And I don't know what would have caused that. God, was that like a jack stand accident gone wrong where the jack stand rotated and damaged that? 40 years old, man. This thing's got some stories to tell.
I got a bug just flying in my mouth.
Ugh, that doesn't sound like it tasted very good. So, hey, is this probably our last bike ride ever in this town?
Yeah?
Yeah. Plus, you've kind of almost outgrown riding on Dada's bike because you can do your own pedal bike now, huh? What do you think? Do you like riding the bikes down to the river and looking at motorhomes and stuff? Me too. I'm gonna miss this because we're moving out to the country. Yeah, and out in the country.
I'm going to miss this too.
Yeah. Well, things change. We're gonna have lots of fun with our new house. What are you singing?
It's a funny song. It's a boat song called Whoa, 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 you boat jump down the log.
I bought this vacuum bleed kit on eBay and it seems to be working okay. I already had the vacuum pump in my possession, which is why I decided to go with this solution. Now, all you have to do is attach it right here like that, and then loosen that nut and turn the vacuum on. It's definitely sucking fluid and there's no leaks here. See this? I've got a tip of a rubber glove, rubber banded over this little filter thing. And what that does is it allows a little capillary action to happen. So it actually builds up a little head of fluid right here at the bleeder valve, which is kind of nice. You can see there's no bubbles. Tighten it down by hand, turn the vacuum off. One nice thing about this kit is it's kind of a transparent bottle, so you can see the color of your brake fluid. And also it's got this bleeder valve at the bottom, which you can unscrew to drain it without having to take the lid off and contaminate all of your vacuum components at the top. Now I just need to top off the reservoir back there. You can see the fluid color is pretty nice. So this forward reservoir is for the back brakes. I don't know why they do that. You'd think the front reservoir would be for the front brakes and the back reservoir would be for the back brakes, but they switch it for some strange reason. That is one spongy feeling brake pedal. I don't remember how it felt before. There are some very long brake lines to the back of the motorhome, so maybe that's the amount of travel that I'm just gonna have on this motorhome. I don't know, but I made a mistake. I pumped the brakes the first time without the cap on it, and you can see it spewed brake fluid all over everything. So there's my cleanup towels down there, and I'm betting that somebody did this before me, judging by the paint damage here, and also the fact that this is all rusty. So I think, yeah, this got completely covered with brake fluid, and brake fluid's quite corrosive, so I think that's what's going on. Well, here's another mistake I made. I put the sway bar on upside down. You can see this bend right here should be downwards to give clearance around the turnbuckle here. Whoops. So I made a post on Facebook to give these parts away, and the guy is coming to pick it up. I probably could have sold them if I wanted to go to that trouble. These motorhomes do have a cult following after all, but you know, I couldn't be hassled, and I just wanted to pass on some goodness. I think that if I had to do the whole front end job all over again up there, I might have just opted to learn how to pop those bearings out. They do need replacing every 25 to 40,000 miles. So that's quite frequently, but if you could find a spare set of knuckles like this, you could always have a new bearing pressed into the knuckles, and it's easier to switch the knuckles out than it is to do the complete job. And those CV joints and half shafts are doing fantastic. Hopefully they're going to go to a good home and not get butchered or anything like that. So if anybody else out there does the 1-ton conversion to their motorhome, then you guys should definitely save your parts and pass them on to somebody else who has the stock setup so that they can keep their motorhomes original.
Let's talk about this bolt and the hole in the drive flange that I stripped out using this bolt. Now, what I've done to temporarily fix it is use one of the stock bolts. I've reused one of these, and it's slightly longer, so you saw earlier how that gives me a little more threads. And I was able to get this torque down to like 60 foot-pounds, so I think the motorhome is fully viable to drive right now. But there's actually another solution that's coming from Manny. He has a whole backup flange for me, and I lucked out because it happened on the driver's side flange, and that flange is held into the final drive with only a single center bolt. So by removing that bolt, the flange will come right out, put the new flange back in, and I should be off to the races. Problem solved. Except that I had two bolts over there on the passenger side, which also felt like they were about to strip out. So I was really gun shy after stripping this one, and I didn't torque those down to the full 75 foot-pounds. There's an issue there too, though. Should I really have been torquing these down to 75 foot-pounds? If you look it up, when using red thread lock compound or Loctite, you want to decrease the torque spec by 20%. So 75 foot-pounds was way too much in that case. But my thread lock was dry-ish. 2 weeks ago, or even 3 weeks ago, is when I threaded these bolts into the flanges finger tight. And then I did the whole trip to the Midwest to buy the pole barn and the house and all that. And coming back here now, I'm finally getting these down to full torque spec. So that thread lock compound is going to be all dry, mostly dry. I don't know which. So it's not going to be the full 20% decrease. I don't know. It's you know, it's kind of sloppy that I did it this way, but I could have very well been over torquing all those bolts. The fact that I only had one strip out on me is kind of amazing in that case. However, there's a very real possibility that this being stripped out is not my fault. It's not on me. Let me explain. You can see, if you go back and watch, that this is the only bolt which I was not able to get threaded fully into the hole finger tight. And the reason for that is unknown. I assumed it was some little piece of debris in there, and so, you know, I just kind of left it out, and then I put my crescent wrench, or not my crescent wrench, my socket wrench on it and torqued it down, but I wasn't having to apply all that much force. Sure, it was more than finger tight, but that socket wrench just fed it right on in there. When you're cross-threading, when you're actively cross-threading a hole, you'll know. It gets harder and harder the deeper into that hole that you go. The resistance the friction gets higher and higher, and so you can feel it when you're cross-threading. And I did not get any of that feedback. It went right down into the hole. Well, how do I know that I was cross-threading it and not just pushing in some debris and kind of fighting a little piece of debris as I was threading it in there? Well, I don't. But I'm guessing that that's the case because of the shape of the wire threads that I stripped out of there. You saw those on the piece of white foam. Those were all crescent shaped. They were not a complete spiral. So that seems to indicate cross-threading. So did I cause this problem, or am I just now having to deal with a problem caused by somebody else? I don't know. But thankfully, Manny has a solution for me, and yeah, I'm just really thankful that that's the case. All right, what's coming next time? I get to do the alignment, and I'm really, really looking forward to that. I've read up on the instructions. I kind of rewrote them, so I've got them in my head, and this actually is going to be a lot of fun. I love this kind of thing, getting adjustments dialed in. It's just, I don't know, something from my days as being a bike shop mechanic professionally. This is the kind of work that I enjoy doing. So there's that. Shouldn't take too much time. I've already made some good progress on that. I got new airbags, and oh my God, these things are expensive. $400 for this chunk of rubber and 2 pieces of metal. And as evidenced by my purchase here, I was planning on redoing the rear suspension anyway, and that's good because I've had an issue with it, and we will talk about that next week. These wonderful human beings are my Patreon supporters, and it's thanks to them that I'm going to keep on making videos for everyone. So yeah, if you want to join their ranks, click there. Otherwise, you can click here and binge watch all of the old episodes, which show how I got from a stock 1978, fully complete original motorhome to this current condition. So we'll get there. There's good stuff coming. So thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.